I'll give you three names that come to my mind. One is Mike Pompeo, who was the director of the CIA and then was the Secretary of State, West Point graduate, #1 in his class. He could help. Number two, the last national security advisor, former Ambassador Robert O'Brien, very well grounded, steady. I think he could be in a position to be helpful. And third, the last deputy national security advisor, Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, retired, also understands all of that. Those are names that I'm actively seeing under consideration in a Trump administration. Dave, we're just going to have to wait and see who he puts in positions of authority. That'll give us a clue where we're headed.
Right. Admiral, would you serve the president-elect?
I have never turned down a request for service from the country, and I will leave it at that, Tom.
Admiral, you're out with a new column here at Bloomberg Opinion focusing on NATO. You say your phone has been ringing off the hook from worried U.S. allies in Europe in particular who are wondering about what's going to happen with NATO. What is your best guess of the path forward here for that alliance, given the rhetoric that we've heard on this campaign trail, given what we heard when Donald Trump was in the White House last time?
One of my European colleagues called me and said, are these the last days of NATO? The short answer is, I don't think so. I think it's highly unlikely a Trump administration would simply pull out of the alliance. But it's going to get uncomfortable over two issues. One is defense spending. The Europeans are going to have to continue to raise their defense spending well above, I think, 2% of gross domestic product, maybe 2.5 or even 3%. That gets into the zip code of the United States and our spending. And the second one is over Ukraine. If the U.S., as has been brooded about by both Trump and Vance, decides to cut off aid to Ukraine, that'll put pressure on the Europeans to support Ukraine. Both of those issues could become wedge issues in the alliance. Final thought, Dave, I think that we'll be okay here. We'll work through those challenges, but it's going to be bumpy times in Brussels.
What is your perspective on what happens with Ukraine? It seems like the president-elect is so hell-bent on ending this with some kind of settlement, maybe before Ukraine wants to have this conflict ended. Is that a foregone conclusion now? And as we talk about the relationship between the U.S. and European nations, do you foresee a moment when, if that's what a President Donald Trump is advocating for, Europe says we're going to go this alone, we have to continue to support the Ukrainian cause?
I think the latter is a real possibility, that if a Trump administration simply walks away from Ukraine, a lot of the Europeans, particularly the big four, Germany, UK, France, and Italy, those have the capacity collectively to support the Ukrainians, frankly. I don't think it'll quite get there, and here's how I think it plays out. I think Trump will put a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians to negotiate. I think Trump will put pressure on the Russians to negotiate. That negotiation could follow a ceasefire early in a Trump administration. How would it come out? I think the Russians probably would end up with Crimea, 4 provinces of Donbass, about 20% of Ukraine. They're in it now. It's going to be hard to get them out militarily. The rest of Ukraine, the other 80%, I think sails on free, democratic, and eventually has a path to NATO.